Hi, everybody, and welcome to Rocksmith Encore. We do dumb things when nobody's looking. But you're looking now, so I guess we'll do a show. Hi, my name's Dan Amrick. I'm the community developer on behalf of Rocksmith. This is Brian McCune, the manager of musical content.
Hello.
For the Rocksmith franchise. And this is Rocksmith Encore. Now, if you're not familiar with what Rocksmith Encore is, it's very simple. There are no rules, and one of us must die before the stream ends.
What?
Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah.
That.
No. Well, if I had told you, you wouldn't have agreed.
Well,
no.
enough.
Actually, Rocksmith Encore is sort of an opportunity for our team to get loose, y'all. And deal with some topics that we don't normally do on our regular Thursday stream. Thursday is very focused around the weekly DLC, but Encore is sort of above and beyond. It's a little something extra. It's stuff that maybe the game doesn't cover, but our experts have some knowledge in that you might like to know. So in the past, we've done an introduction to guitar effects pedals. We've done the anatomy of metal. Brian Shu stopped by and gave some amazing playing tips on how to play smoother, better, faster, and more like Shu, really. And the very first Rocksmith Encore that we do, we only do these once a month. So way back around this time last year, I think it was Brian. This was Brian's idea. The whole concept of Rocksmith Encore. You get the credit for that and the blame.
Yep.
And
more work for me,
Yes.
just because I felt like it.
You did the very first one on sort of the physics of music, sort of how sound works, how sort of above and beyond. What lets you appreciate music in the first place is your ability to hear it and the way that resonance works and some sort of nerdy science topics. And so we're returning to that, basically picking up where we left off. I called it the physics of sound, but really it's more the physics of music.
Correct.
Is that more accurate?
Yeah. I felt by calling it physics of sound people might be expecting us to get into talking about waveform. We will talk about waveform a little bit, but we're not going to talk about distortion or any of that kind of stuff.
Right.
We're going to talk about kind of the building blocks of music, and we went over that on the very first one when we did this. I guess it was February of 2017, the very first one. So we will be building on information that we learned. I will review it very quickly, and in the context of trying to push us towards learning new concepts.
Yeah. If you haven't seen the original one, go watch it now. We'll wait. Also, something that you should know is that our moderator for this chat is Black Widow 9. She is in our chat room. You know her from our forums. She is one of our community representatives, and she's awesome. And better still, she is loaded for bear. She has a bunch of codes to give away, so we'll be doing some various DLC Steam codes giveaways. And I'm not going to prompt that. That's whenever she feels like doing it. We're probably here for about an hour. So there's going to be 3 distinct giveaways. I've armed her with some random codes that I had in my archive. So if you're just here for free stuff, good news, there will still be free stuff.
Good. You also might learn a thing or two.
You might learn a thing or two. So basically, Brian's going to give his presentation. I'm going to ask questions, but you can ask questions too. I have a laptop in front of me. You may have noticed. And I will be monitoring the chat. And also, Black Widow will be helping us archive any questions that you have that maybe we might miss in real time that I can go back to, ask him for extra information later. So if you don't get your answer right away, don't give up hope. It might just be waiting in the queue. Also, we have do we have the operator cam?
Oh, we do.
Is the operator here? So there's the waving Brian Pody and Travis Kindred.
They exist.
Are on what we call the wheels of steel. They're at the thing. So we may throw to them for some insight or for questions that you may have. But in any case, I will turn it over to you because where the hell did we leave off?
Well, we left off. We were talking about the harmonic series, and we had taken an acoustic guitar and talked about that. And we can do that. But I'm sure you noticed that in front of me I have a keyboard.
They're smart. Many people have noticed you have a keyboard. Does this confirm Piano Smith?
No, that is not where this is going, and that's not what this today is about.
Yeah,
I just wanted to be able to trigger different samples of things. So we'll get into that a little bit later.
But please don't take anything that we say today as any sort of future revelations. That we're not talking in code. There's no secret puzzles to solve. The fact that we acknowledge that keyboards exist does not mean that we're starting a keyboard project. It's very important to me that we not have a chat room full of jokes about insert instrument here, Smith, when actually we want you to use this opportunity to ask questions about what we're talking about. Treat this as like a little free college-level course in in music and theory and how it all works.
And
So-
I am basing this off of a college level course that I took called The Interplay of Physics and Music. So I gleaned a lot of very useful information. I was so glad that I took it very first semester of college. It was a good building block for how I approach music, how I approach writing music, and how I approach composition and making sure that things are stacked harmonically properly, and we'll get into all that in a little bit here. So,
can you explain what all these buttons do over
they
the course of
they
it?
make sounds.
Okay. Hey, thanks. That's out of the way.
Yeah, good. So, do we have it pulled up the title slide here? Oh, there we go.
We do.
Part 2, and we're gonna break it down into 2 sections. Rather than immediately picking up where we left off.
Okay. A little recap.
We will get back to that. That'll be the second half, and we'll. But I figured it might be nice to do a survey of kind of the guitar instrument of guitar, or kind of how stringed instruments got to where they are.
Okay.
So why don't we just start by going back in time a little bit? Let's travel back in time.
Oh, fantastic! Oh, we need. Yeah, I was gonna say if only
All right,
we had
next slide, please. So I don't do this forever.
No, please do that forever.
All right. So cavemen.
Yes, I've heard of them.
That's where it started. No, I just think that the musical possibilities of stringed instruments that must have been realized from the day when the first cavemen twanged on the bow and arrow.
And that was the washboard bass.
Yeah, and that was the very. I mean, I think they were more interested in survival and eating and not being eaten. But
it's always good.
Tension on a string does produce a sound, and it was like, boom. So we might have had our very first, play off of what do you think? Presidents of the United States of America.
Yeah,
kinda
probably
sound.
a bass guitar or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think lump was written actually at 8,000 BC.
Probably.
No, I'm just kidding. But anyway, so let's.
You're the professor. I believe you. You lie to me. I'm like, okay.
No, I'm just
8,000 BC.
Well, I don't know.
There.
I made that up. Yeah, actually, so. The earliest we're gonna take a look at some images in a minute of the earliest string instruments that have been found, which is pretty cool. But from the earliest recorded times, strings were cut into long, thin strips from the intestines of slaughtered animals.
I mean, I've always heard of catgut strings, and I assumed that was literal.
Yeah. The term catgut is used to describe the strings, but it does not by any way mean that they were made from a type of feline. The other materials were sometimes experimented with, such as animal muscles or connective tissue, but it was typically sheep or lamb gut.
Ew.
Yeah, so for those of you who like haggis...
I was going to say, is it simply because that was what was available in abundance?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's the materials themselves, the intestines, they were very flexible, they were remarkably strong, and relatively easy to make uniform. So and when they were stretched near to breaking between two supports, like on top of a soundboard, they could be made to vibrate at an accurately controlled frequency. Caveman scientists, I guess. Well, in time it was found that many metals could be drawn out into wires and were even stronger and more uniform, and that could be used for the same purpose. But we'll get to that process.
Metal was actually the first form of metal.
Yeah, sheep. Yes, absolutely.
Let's get Arthur for a fact check on
that. Let's move on to the next slide. Let's talk about a family of instruments that the guitar is in a way a part of, but not entirely. Instruments with open strings.
So things without frets, things that you aren't changing, just like the natural resonance of that string is what it was designed to do.
So let's take a look at the oldest instrument. The very earliest instrument known to have existed in ancient Sumeria was the lyre, and that's Lyre, not Liar. Right. What I call you sometimes. No,
right.
I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. It had been so it was between 4 and 6 strings, each tuned to a different note. stretched across some kind of a soundboard onto a yoke. It was usually held in the left hand while plucking the strings with the right hand. I don't know how they know that, but maybe it's left hand.
Probably because we have illustrations,
Yeah, possibly. In classical Greece, lyres only had 4 strings, which were all that were necessary to play the small number of acceptable chords of that time. So the image here, the lyres of Ur, or the harps of Ur, are considered to be the world's oldest surviving stringed instruments. They were discovered in 1929. I'm going to try not to go into my Ron Burgundy right now. So they were excavating a cemetery of Ur in between like 1922 and 1934, and they discovered 3 pieces of lyre and 1 harp in Ur, which is ancient Mesopotamia, current day Iraq. So these instruments are over 4,500 years old. So we're talking about like somewhere around 2,500 BCE.
And they're murdered to intonate.
Yeah, they
but
are.
Pody can do it.
Yeah, and they have some ornamentation on them. They have some bulls on them. One of them is, I think, gold. I'm not sure.
Huh.
Let's move on to the next one. So there was kind of a very limited range when you have only 4 to 6 notes.
Yeah.
So musicians, by nature of being rebellious or adventurous, they wanted to rebel against that limited range, and so they wanted to add more and more strings. So they wanted to add more strings so they could play more notes, and so this led way to the cithara, or the harp. The biblical instrument of King David, the same instrument that is referenced in Hallelujah. Is it Leonard Cohen? That Jeff Buckley covered. Available now for downloading on Rocksmith.
Hey, well done. Smooth.
Yeah. So by early medieval times, small portable harps with about like 25 strings and a like characteristic like sloping sound box were very popular, and particularly in Ireland and Wales. FYI.
It should not surprise you to know that we have funny people in our chat room. I just want to call out, firstly, Barely a Bear 45 says, but can it gent? Which is great. But Megatony YT says, Liars of Ur is a bitchin' metal album name, and I call dibs. So do it. Whatever you get out of this is fine with us. Thanks for paying attention.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Let's go ahead and take a look at the next slide.
We left harps in Ireland.
Yeah. So next up,
what the hell is that?
This is a psaltery. So
you didn't pronounce the P, though.
I did not.
Is it supposed to? It's a psaltery, right?
I don't pronounce the P on this word. Is it a psaltery?
Is it silent?
Oh, Dan, it's so good to have you here.
I had a 5-hour energy before I came up here because last time we did this, I was listening and I started to yawn.
I know, I saw it.
And
in
you
your
got
eyes.
really angry at me, and I didn't want you to be offended that
I
was falling
angry.
asleep. So now all you get is quips, quips, quips.
God bless you, Dan Amrich. You're a good student. You're a loud student, if not a.
I like to participate,
that's
even
good.
if it's inappropriate to do so.
Learn by doing.
All
that's
right.
very good.
What else, Mr. Science?
Let's actually. We're gonna change it up here for a second, and I am going to. We have some different camera modes today.
Yeah.
We're very excited.
We have
about.
advanced visual aids,
Check this
as
out.
they say in the education.
I'm very
biz.
excited. Yes, we have green screen.
There we go.
They revealed the technology behind it. So as you can see, these strings are arranged from small to large, and as we talked about in the last one, when you shrink a string, when you shorten a string size, it raises the pitch. So this is going from low to high here, and because there are no frets, this is their way of accessing a lot of different instruments. So this has a ton of strings. So while harps were like still restricted to like a diatonic scale, which we will get into in a little bit, possibly, they became less popular. So they faced competition with similar instruments from Eastern traditions like the psaltery and the dulcimer, and then eventually, when keyboards were added to the mix, it really overshadowed these old instruments. So basically, a keyboard instrument like a harpsichord or a piano, which was historically called the pianoforte.
That's right.
It actually, the harpsichord is an instrument that plucks the strings, and a piano has hammers, and it's activating the strings. So it's basically, it has all of these options, but by pressing a button, you're only going to activate one of them rather than trying to pluck out one of them with a quill, which was what people were doing back then.
Well, as soon as you showed the psaltery, I thought, oh, that looks like a dulcimer, because being a guy that goes to the Ren Fair a lot, there's live people.
I don't
playing
doubt it.
Dulcimer,
I don't doubt it, Dan. Well, yeah, that's going to be that's my little foray into the psaltery.
So basically, the psaltery, like that same structure that we see there, that's what's inside a piano, that's what's inside a harpsichord, a series of different length strings, and the length is tied to the pitch, and then what kind of sound it makes depends on how you interact with that string.
Yeah, and a dulcimer might sound something like this. Something, that's played with hammers.
Right, that's like two little
like hammer
sticks.
dulcimer.
Right.
But psaltery is probably plucked or played with little hammers. This is our first run. This has been fun. All right, let's move on to the next slide if we can. I want to. So this eventually involved the harp, the psaltery, and the dulcimer, and the harps survived as a specialist instrument, and then morphed into what is the modern concert harp. And the modern concert harp has 47 strings and an elaborate system of pedals for changing the tuning of each note. And it doesn't have a very extensive solo repertoire, but it plays a prominent role in the modern symphony orchestra. So hopefully you all know what the sounds like. I used it for the for that effect. Basically, I wasn't planning on going into this detail, but I do think that the pedal system on the harp is quite fascinating.
I was going to ask, because, okay, so just for context, we have a Celtic harp at home, which does not have pedals, but has little levers that can raise things a half step, so that if I want to change the key of the harp, I have to go through like 4 octaves and activate these things.
In each octave?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because...
well, what's cool about the modern harp is that there are 7 pedals which change the whole instrument. So by default, the whole instrument is tuned to a C-flat major scale, and the pedals will shorten the strings by a half step or a whole step. So you'd have that, and then if you move all the pedals to the middle position, and if you move them to the sharp position, it's so you can only the interesting thing about harp is that it can only play notes that you can spell with the musical alphabet. So basically, if you have A through G, you can play any flavor of those notes, but you can't. Let's see. You can't play a chromatic scale on a harp.
Oh, okay.
You can do it slowly, but the whole instrument is basically tuned to 7 notes in some configuration
at any given time.
So it could be like, here's A through G, and I can change one of them. I'll change the C to C sharp. I can change the F to an F sharp.
And that would be by pressing a pedal on the harp to make that one specific change.
Yeah, and
so all of the Fs would go to F sharp with that pedal.
Correct.
Okay.
So this would be like A, B flat, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G. And you get
we're getting more and more mysterious.
Yeah, you get cool sounds. You can mix tonalities that way. It's a very cool instrument to write for. I wasn't planning on going into that detail, but it's worth doing. Yeah. So anyway, that's basically the modern harp. That's the extent of the open stringed instruments. Now we're going to move on to talking about fretted instruments. As it pertains to, because the guitar is one. And we kind of want to talk about how we got here. So all of those open string instruments, no one knows exactly when musicians realized that you could stop a note at any point with your finger, and thus shortening the vibrating length and raising the pitch. But there were early instruments that had like long fingerboards and narrow ridges. The strings can be pressed down, but they needed frets, and the reason they needed the frets, in the early, I'm going too fast. Let me slow down.
You get so excited.
I do get excited about this. So the frets, as they were called, were often no more than pieces of gut tied across the fingerboard perpendicular to the strings. So right now we're used to like having metal wire, but they were actually made out of gut at the beginning. And they served the same function as like movable bridges on the monochord. Did we talk about the monochord in the first one?
Did. No.
A monochord is just like literally just one string on a board.
Okay.
And the monochord is, so you have your two fixed nodes, and then there's like just one little movable bridge. And then you can pick a note and you can slide it. Basically, think about it as halfway between a guitar and a trombone. Like, it's not that it would play slides, but it has a mechanism where you can shorten and lengthen the note.
This sounds a bit like a diddly bow.
I've never heard of a diddly bow.
Okay. Diddly bow is a similar concept, although it's possible that maybe the bridge doesn't move. Maybe it's just something that you're supposed to play with a slide.
Oh, okay.
Jack White plays one in the documentary.
Okay.
It might get loud.
Oh, okay, so this is a modern instrument.
Yeah, a modern, like, rural Southern American instrument. Very simple, like literally two nails, a string, a bridge, and you electrify it, and you get a really cool thing. But it sounds like there's similar concepts at play between these two.
So
look up diddly bow.
I look up diddly bow. Also look up hurdy-gurdy. That's a very fun instrument.
Ooh, right.
It's a string instrument that you kind of wind up, and it bows it kind of bows the string on a circle. It's just the stupidest instrument. It's really funny. It's an old instrument. Does Travis know about it? Or he's giving me glares as if he loves the instrument, and I just made fun of it. Anyway, so
there you go. There's a diddly bow.
So getting back. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Oh, that's one with like an Altoids tin.
Yeah, the Altoids tin.
That's basically
is
a
the bridge.
monochord.
Yeah.
It'd be fun to see if we could get that up on the string.
We can't.
Just to be fair, the hurdy-gurdy is amazing, and it's basically the bagpipe of string instruments.
It is the bagpipe of string instruments,
and it's fantastic.
I
love the hurdy-gurdy.
I didn't create
Gotta rep up for the hurdy-gurdy.
I didn't create a slide for it because we're actually not going to talk about string instruments because I feel like that's going to deviate too far from what we were talking, like what we want to talk about with plucked instruments. Today's symposium. Today's adventures through music history.
Jams Bar says, "Please stop droning on about the hurdy-gurdy." I see what you did there. It was good.
Very, very good. So getting back to what we were talking about the frets and how they were originally made of gut. So it's frets. It's important to realize that they do more than merely tell you where to press down. The pad of your finger being soft will actually absorb energy from a vibrating string. So by pressing down behind the fret, you ensure that the string has a hard surface to vibrate against and will not be so severely damped. So that's why we always have you play behind the fret and not on top of it. Right. Because if you're on top of the fret,
it's not going to be as solid a connection. Yeah.
So so in the Middle Ages in Europe, there were a great number of, you skipped my slide, bro. There were a great number of fretted instruments, and they had a relatively small number of strings, and they were all played by plucking with a plectrum, which is what we knew. A pick is a plectrum, ostensibly, and but a plectrum could be made of any material. It could be a quill. It could be a synthetic material. It could be felt.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've seen some felt picks.
So all of them had a hollow sound, and because they had hollow sound boxes and elaborately carved holes, and we have some images of those too. And that is to communicate the sound to the outside air, so the instrument just doesn't vibrate within the body; it projects.
Okay.
So there were many individual differences, but three main lines of development can be discerned. One leads to the violin, but like I said, that veers too far from what we want to talk about today. So let's get on with it. So one of the lines that leads basically to the lute. So the Moorish occupation of Spain. So yes, that's
I just didn't expect that to
come
in.
Yeah, so they brought an instrument which in Arabic is al-oud, which we know as the lute. and for nearly 400 years, basically until the 18th century, it held the unquestioned place of honor in music, and second only to the human voice. It was without equal as a court instrument and had an enormous repertoire written for it. But only, unfortunately, only a tiny fraction of which is heard today. And it reached its peak in about in Elizabethan England, but I don't really know why it fell from popularity so much. Everything has their day and then ceases to be.
Sure.
Maybe that's just it.
It's just trendy.
And
These kids with their lute music, probably just,
yeah. Exactly. So, nevertheless, it did fall, and much of the music that had been written for it was lost. But there is interest. There was a lot of interest in the lute. Within the 20th century, there is an interest in early music, Baroque music, natural instruments. So there is a whole subsection of musicology and music performance that is dedicated to early music as possible. I have a very good friend who plays harpsichord music. I have friends who play natural trumpet, which is a trumpet with holes, which is rather than pistons or valves. It's very, very difficult to play. But anyway, so that is a thing that is happening today.
Sting from the Police.
Sting from the Police
loves to play lute, and for a while, I remember reading an interview where he said he would wake up every morning and work on Bach on the lute just to be able to do it. And he said it was incredibly difficult, but super satisfying.
Yeah.
So, there's still people playing lute today, and their name is Sting.
Their name is Sting. So that's just where one of the lines kind of goes towards. Let's take a look at where one of the other lines of fretted instruments goes. So in Renaissance Italy, one of the most popular instruments of its day was the citern, which is the instrument on your left. So it was entirely strung with metal wires, usually 6 pairs, had fixed metal frets like the guitar. Are we getting some?
Getting jokes. Matt Al says the lute fell out of fashion because you couldn't use it on modern wall brackets. You know how we hang all of our guitars on the wall?
I mean, it literally fell out of fashion.
Yeah, literally. Thanks, Al. Appreciate it.
So we've got metal strings, metal frets, plucked with a plectrum. It's starting to look a little bit like what we have today. But the sound box was pear-shaped. So it being kind of small, it made it robust and inexpensive. So, and as players could get many interesting sound from metal strings, it was very popular, particularly among working class musicians. In fact, it seems to me that it shares very many features with the modern electric guitar. But nevertheless, it faded from.
It also disappeared
in the 18th century, and you have to look for its descendants among various folk instruments like the Romanian bandura and the Austrian zither, which I also have on this page. So this has kind of morphed into other giant pear-shaped instruments that have tons and tons of strings. Let's move on. So that was so one line leads to the lute, one line was through the citern, and then has kind of gone into these regional instruments. And now let's take a look at the line of instruments that leads us to the guitar. So this is I think the picture on the bottom is an instrument that was built in 1450, which is really incredible. So this is the guitarn. It had usually 4 strings. I think this one has double strings on it, so it's got 8. Has movable gut frets, and the sound box was flat on top and bottom with incurving sides, whether for acoustic reasons or to make it easier to carry, I don't know. But it was played with a small quill plectrum and usually of goose feather.
Movable frets.
Yeah, because they're made of guts. You could maybe they couldn't get
sweeten the tuning
or play in different. Maybe that was their way of accessing different scales if they didn't have equal temperament. And we'll get into that kind of.
Is that German? Thing. It looks German from the word guitarn.
I actually don't know. I think it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's move on to the next slide, gentlemen. All right. So this is one that Pody asked, are you going to have a slide on this instrument? This is the vihuela. So by the 16th century,
never heard of this.
Small instrument with 4 pairs of gut strings. This is a Renaissance vihuela, so it has more.
Okay.
This was very popular in Southern Europe, particularly in Spain. So this is a vihuela. Sometimes it was called the guitarra. Now we're getting closer.
We are getting closer.
So traditionally they were strummed, again, with a quill plectrum, with complicated rhythms for dancing. So this might be, this is the early onset flamenco. If you
suffer from early onset flamenco, please call your doctor.
Yeah. Thank you. Alley-oop on that joke. Thank you. So that was the vihuela. Pody, do you have anything else that you wanted to add about that? Because you seem to be an expert on it at some point in your life.
Yeah, I've never even heard of the vihuela.
I think Travis and Pody are trading microphones because Pody doesn't normally talk on the stream.
No.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. At least we got to use that cam one more time. All right.
For what it's worth, Beatmaster 80 says that the guitarn, the one with the movable frets, is probably still easier to set up than a Floyd Rose, and he's probably right.
Yeah, probably correct.
Probably right.
So we're getting pretty close here. So I think the next slide is actually the guitar.
Hey,
so here we are.
Is.
I've picked a nylon string just for fun, for funsies.
Well, that's the most obvious connection to the earlier things.
Yeah,
nylon strings are
is
based
referred to as the classical guitar,
right?
In a way,
based on the gut string concept, anyway.
Absolutely. So as time went on, the number of strings settled down to 6, and the frets became fixed and made of metal. And in the 19th century, more and more composers started writing for these instruments, which meant that increased loudness was called for, and the sound box became greatly enlarged. So the result is a well-known modern guitar, because of its association with popular music, and it's arguably the most widely played instrument in the Western world today. Nor has its evolution stopped there, obviously, because the electric guitar is a modification that we use every day here at Rocksmith.
Well, here's what intrigues me, because we talked about all these instruments that were super popular everywhere and then suddenly disappeared and now are just seen as sort of like archaic instruments, right? Realistically, that could happen to the guitar.
Yeah, I mean, what I think of as the funny play in the new Star Trek films when they play Beastie Boys Sabotage, and they're like, is that classical music?
Right.
It's like there will come a time when this music will be very like antiquated and old, and it will be studied and performed. But what's great about what hope I have for the guitar and the music of today is that documentation and record keeping and recordings and videos, and we have a lot of information to keep these instruments alive and the knowledge of them alive. So there won't be a lot of guesswork, or there won't be a lot of missing lute music like there is.
Right.
We won't have to reconstruct what it was. We have a lot of evidence of its ubiquitousness.
Right.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So maybe we've gotten past the point of obsolescence. Maybe guitar is here forever.
I think
Please
it
go
is.
buy Rocksmith.
Yeah. So I don't know if we wanted to talk at all. I thought maybe we would get some questions because I put an image of a nylon guitar that people might be asking about nylon string guitar versus acoustic guitar.
We actually have not had a ton of questions. More people are sort of going in the chat room or offering their own sort of add-ons, but nobody's questioning your awesome knowledge. So we have to accept that Brian is our expert and savior, and that you know everything.
Sure.
If you have any questions, now's a good time. But I'm looking at sort of our background, of like, oh, here's our queue of questions. Queue is empty. The only thing was Matt Al had said, so is the psaltery a precursor for the dulcimer? And I had already typed back and said, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, they are very similar in construction. When you look at them, it's clear that that they are related, that it's possible somebody saw one and said, yes, but have you tried doing it this way? And that could have simply been the birth of that new instrument based on the previous one.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I do want to say just one more thing about the nylon string guitar versus the acoustic guitar. So since the strings are made from nylon or nylon wrapped in metal, so they can have a much lower tension than steel string guitars.
Yes.
So it doesn't require that that the neck has a truss rod in it. So the neck can be made entirely of wood, and also the interior bracing can be lighter. So it's a much lighter instrument to play because it doesn't have to keep metal together, metal taut. It's keeping the nylon together. So it's a much more delicate sound in that way.
Travis, are you giving us a howdy how? I think he wants to say something.
Yes, I certainly am. Since the audience has no questions, I have loads of interest in sort of classic ancient instruments. In college, I played a lot of viol da gamba,
Yeah.
which had gut movable frets.
Yes.
And
and 7 strings?
It depends.
Yeah.
The basic one has at least 6,
Mm-hmm.
and the tuning is very similar. So one of the reasons a lot of bass players end up becoming viol da gamba players is because the instrument is tuned in fourths with a third, so just like a guitar,
Yeah.
just in a different key. So you often see
But
them
it's a
in
bowed
7 string.
instrument, we should state. Right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm. Although there is a lot of repertoire for plucking in sort of chord shapes, and the chord shapes are extremely similar to guitar. What I find really interesting is that the construction of the oud, the citron, and even stuff like the zither, like combined, start to make out the guitar.
Yeah.
Like it borrows from
Bits and
every single one of
pieces,
these
right.
things you've mentioned.
Yeah. All roads kind of lead to the guitar, except for the road that leads to the violin family. Yeah, and it's interesting how it has evolved and stayed because one thing that I mentioned during the last session, and thank you, Travis, for that observation. Did you actually have a question, or was that just wanted to talk?
Oh
about
no,
it?
I just wanted to like put in my 2 cents.
Okay. Yeah. It's. I talked last week about how guitar is a very ergonomic instrument, and it's made to make sense and be easy on the hands. Now, some people might disagree with how difficult some of the chord shapes are to play, but a lot of the fundamental chord shapes of the D all the triads on the high strings and being able to play root fifth octave in that shape, that was all part of the intentional design of it, and so it's supposed to be played by humans, so it should be kind of accessible. I think a lot of the other instruments that have like a zillion strings, like the zither or something, it's like instruments, novelty instruments you might see at NAMM. Like
Right.
the hilarious bass monstrosity. That's like, why?
Did you see the this year
yes.
Fender?
Yeah.
Fender in their booth had a 9-neck guitar, where they basically did one of everything, and like. The hilarious part of that photo is that in the middle, on the center guitar, there's a strap button, as if you would put it on in some way. But yeah, I mean, hey, that's what trade shows are for, is making ridiculous things that people take photos of and say, "Did you see this?"
I mean, and I'm actually all for like experimentation and music technology and music instrument making, and
But how many necks do you need?
I
need
mean,
9?
I mean, 9 is never enough. I would say. I don't know. It depends on how many hands you have. I don't know what Hindu god is going to be playing that instrument.
I do have a question from our own Black Widow 9. She says, "Where does banjo enter into this evolution?"
So banjo is actually one of the very few American instruments. I don't have it in this lineage, but it's interesting that a lot of the instruments that we have today are pretty old by a few standards, but some of the newest instruments like the saxophone, I'll get to banjo, but the saxophone is what came about in like 1850 or so. So if you studied saxophone in college, you could trace your lineage to Adolph Sax, probably by like 4 or 5 generations of teachers, like directly to the person who made it. Banjo is an interesting story because I did some research on this. My grandfather played the banjo, and Jared McAdams in the office also plays. It was developed in the American South by I believe by slaves, and I think that some of the resources that I had read said that drums were outlawed, or they wouldn't allow them to have drums, so they actually made a stringed instrument out of a drum. And so that is what gives it a unique
resonator
resonance.
Kind of, yeah.
And the interesting fact about that is that Remo, which is a drum company that makes drum heads, they also make banjo heads.
Yes.
Because it's the same
It's
thing.
the same
So
thing.
they make it's a very interesting thing to me that that's why it literally looks like a snare drum with strings. Like a heavy thing.
I think
And
that's
so-
amazing, because there was
was a
someone
s-
like, "Hey man, you can't have that drum." He's like, "No drum. This is a stringed
Yeah,
instrument."
so
They're like,
it was a subversive thing. Now I can't. I mean, that it has been many years since I did that research, so I don't know if that was just one way or I don't know if that's entirely true because I didn't do banjo research for this. But maybe Jared, if he's in the chat, can chime in and say if I'm right or wrong. But I do believe that that's true. And just like jazz is like an American art idiom, the banjo is like the only American instrument. Basically, well, that and the sousaphone, which is in a way, but that's in a kind of a form of a tuba. Anyway, getting all over the place here, and we have not yet even gotten to the physics part. So, I think this is a good time for us to take a break, and we will be right back. I believe Pody has a video queued up, and we will actually get back to the physics.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in. This is Rocksmith Encore, the Physics of Sound Part 2, and actually Part 2 is where we're going to get into the physics of sound. So stick around. We still have some more giveaways to do as well.
Here we are in the middle of production. It took a couple years to make it happen, but here we are. Ride of the Valkyries is going to be like a lot of fun for the hard rock metal fans out there.
Are you ready? Let's try one. Here we go. Perfect. Okay, from the top. Here we go.
Trying to get the Ride of the Valkyries up the instrument. We haven't had anything like that before. So there's going to be a lot of new digital calisthenics for you. Classical music has stuck around for quite some time. And it's an important pillar of Western music. We went for an early 80s metal kind of sound to it. I think if you grab just the first... And it jumps back and forth between 9/8 and 4/4.
Tremolo doesn't start right away on that.
Just do it up until that last drum.
It plays around with the melody and the rhythm in a really fun way. I think some of our advanced players are really going to enjoy that.
Yeah.
The shaky start. No pickup, but it's clean.
Sorry, one more for me. Here we go. Yes.
I think we knew we wanted Ride of the Valkyries to have like an early 80s metal kind of sound to it, but I think probably the most adventurous is in the Hall of the Mountain King, which is Latin and has lots of harmonics.
I've been working on the Rocksmith material now for about 2.5 months. The trickiest of the pieces that I've been working on was the rhythm arrangement for In the Hall of the Mountain King.
I mean, how insane would it be to pop on the pedal for, you know, like...
In the Hall of the Mountain King has like some tricky rhythms and a lot of harmonics and some fun tremolo stuff. It's going to be hard for people playing on the top level, but thankfully it's a Rocksmith track, so you drop it in at level 0 and it's going to be manageable and fun.
They're all really, really fun arrangements.
Anything that you're doing that is technically challenging can only increase your proficiency of the guitar.
To do a lot of things from pick to fingers, which was very difficult to do a lot of that mindset switching.
It's important to develop dexterity and fretboard knowledge. I like that one, but he was doing it. Yeah, he was doing it on all of them. Yeah, that's fine. Guys, that's really nice. That sounds really excellent. These 5 pieces have stood the test of time. They've been around for many, many decades.
Thank you to everyone who was trying to click on the screen for more. You can't do that. But that is a 3-part series on the making of the original Boxsmith pack, and you can find that at our YouTube channel. That URL again is youtube.com. And look for Rocksmith game. My name's Dan Amrick. I'm the community developer on behalf of Rocksmith, and I'm getting a head full of learning today from our friend Brian McCune, our manager of musical content. You have stumbled upon Rocksmith Encore, which is sort of our chance to stream a little outside of the lines of our weekly DLC stream that we do every Thursday at 3 p.m., so please do show up again in 3 days. But what we're doing today is part 2 of Brian's original Rocksmith Encore, which was the physics of sound and the physics of music, sort of how everything works and why you can appreciate music the way you do, the way that sound waves work, and some specifics about how stringed instruments work on a physics level and on a science level. And while we do have some more giveaways, courtesy of Black Widow 9, our moderator, so stick around for that and look for the giveaways. I know she just gave away some 90s stuff. But you said that for part 2, we're going to dive into the science a little bit more.
Yeah.
We just, if you just jumped in, don't worry, you'll be able to watch the full replay. But we did a very, very brief history of stringed instruments and their evolution of how we sort of got from all these ancient instruments up to the guitar. Now that we're sort of in guitar land, are we going into the physics of guitars?
Well, we're going to get back into the physics of the open string again and talk about how the building blocks of music, where we stopped, we had built up the harmonic series and we talked about the power chord and the root, fifth, and octave, and I want to revisit that and go a little bit further. Let's do it. Back to physics. I don't have physics music, but I could.
I have a back.
Physics music. Oh, nothing, Pody.
Nothing. Womp womp, ba-da.
Physics.
Oh, physics music.
All right.
Oh, okay. And the physics music resolved.
Yeah.
That's good.
From minor to major, and we'll talk about what those things are here.
Okay,
in a minute.
good.
Cool. So, Pody, let's take a look at the next slide, and let's take
Back
so.
to physics.
So this is kind of what we started talking about last time. You want to dissolve me into the screen here? Woo, that's fun. All right. So we talked about the natural harmonics that happen on an open string the last time, and we found them all. That one that's the half that's over the 12th fret. And this one is over the 7th, I believe, and it divides the string into 3s. And we talked about basically nodes and antinodes. So a string vibrating between 2 fixed points has the highest activation at the antinode here. And we talked about how a string, when it's vibrating, is not vibrating in only one way. It's actually vibrating in a number of ways. And you can actually achieve these different modes of vibrations by placing your finger lightly, creating another node, thus the natural harmonics that exist on the string. So we talked a little bit about the building blocks of that, but let's just revisit and then go a little bit further. So I've broken it down here. Sorry, I've got to stay in frame.
Yeah, stay in frame.
So here we have the open string and the harmonic on the 12th. And basically, this forms the octave. So in music, an octave, which is Latin for the Latin is octavus for eighth. It's the interval between one musical pitch and another with either half or double its frequency. So we can octave up or octave down.
Okay.
So the octave relationship is a natural phenomenon that has been referred to as like the basic miracle of music, and the use of which is common in most musical systems. So, why octave and 8? Because why octave? Thank you. Why octave and 8? It's because most important musical scales in Western music is typically written using 8 notes, and the interval between the first and last notes is an octave.
Okay.
Using the musical alphabet, if we started a C major scale starting on C, it's C B. Sorry, C D E F G A B C, and the initial and final C's being an octave apart. So 2 notes separated by an octave have the same letter name and are of the same pitch class.
But different frequency.
Different frequency. So it's
Okay.
double the frequency. To a lot of listeners, it will sound like the same note because they are so, it's so harmonically similar. That ratio of 2 to 1. So I'm going to play it on the keyboard here, like 2 different E's, or maybe we do it on A's. So that's our low A, and here's our high. Here's the one that's in half. So they're occurring at the same time. Yes, green screen. Yeah. So that is. I'm going to go back over to the screen. Sorry, we didn't really rehearse the back and forth between the green screen and not, but I'm gonna.
We're playing fast and loose live.
We are.
So thank you
So,
for understanding.
We're doing great.
Don't
so
worry about it.
Next slide. Want to show. So when you have those 2 notes sounding separately, it's moving at a certain frequency. I think around 110, and this is a 220. So 220 cycles per second is what we're talking about. And when they're occurring at the same time, the waveforms are basically, they look like that.
Oh, okay.
And so the where the waveforms have their nodes in the air, they match up perfectly. And so it's very, very consonant. This is what we refer to as perfect consonance. This is why it's called the perfect octave. After the unison, which is like two of the same note, the octave is the simplest interval in music. So like I said, the human ear tends to hear both as essentially the same due to how closely they're related. And so notes separated by an octave ring together, adding a pleasing sound to music. And so that's why they're given the same name. That's why it's A and then also A. So this is called octave equivalency. So the assumption that pitches 1 or more octaves apart are musically equivalent in many ways, leading to the contention that scales are uniquely defined by specifying the intervals within
that
an
octave.
octave. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah.
This kind of ties back into what you were saying about the harp, where you can hit a pedal on a harp and change the Fs to F sharp. So that would be a different scale
Correct.
that you were playing in because you've
Correct.
changed that F to an F
Yeah.
sharp. All the same sort of space in between, but it's where you decide those stops are.
Yeah, and so it's
that,
regardless of octave.
Okay.
That pitch class, it shifts uniformly.
Okay.
Very good to bring it back to the instruments that we were talking
trying.
about. Oh, that's great. All right, let's go to the next slide. Now that we've discussed, because we talked about what the perfect octave was, so here we are back at the harmonic series. So that was the relationship of 2 to 1, and we talked about how harmonious, or the actual word in music theory is consonant. This is perfect consonance. That's consonants with a CE, not TS.
Right.
Yeah.
Not like parts of an alphabet, but consonant being pleasing to the ear generally,
Correct.
right? And dissonant being the opposite.
Correct.
When it's like, oh, that doesn't sound right.
Yeah, and we'll get into the difference between consonants and dissonance, and there's perfect consonants and imperfect consonants, and we'll get into that.
Okay.
Cool. So let's move on. So we've looked at that ratio of 1 to 2. Let's look at this next ratio. So if this was, A110 and this is A220, this is what? 330.
I would have said A440.
No, that would be
So it doesn't
4.
double.
It doesn't double. So this is actually an E.
Okay.
So this is an A and an E. And look at this relationship of the waveform. It's a relationship of 2 to 3.
Right.
And what do we know whenever we see an A and E together in Rocksmith?
That they're probably a chord. It's a fifth.
Right? Yeah, you would see it written as A5 in the game.
Right.
Typically, if there were 3 notes, it would tell you that, that's A5.
Sure.
So hit the next slide for me. And this is a perfect fifth.
Ah.
So basically, even though it's 2 different note names, A and E, because they exist in the same harmonic spectrum based on A110, This is another type of perfect consonance. This is the perfect fifth.
So these are subsets of that same core note. It's
Correct.
just how you're dividing them up
Correct.
based on where you shorten that string.
Yeah. So we
In
had
a
that.
guitar context.
So if our fundamental up here was, can I get the synth back for a second? So down here,
A.
and then we have A, and then here we have these two notes are happening at the same time. So when they're apart,
I was going to say you get a march.
yeah, or twinkle twinkle.
So
twinkle,
that's a
twinkle.
perfect.
That's
Oh,
a perfect
alright.
fifth.
That's a
the way.
perfect fifth.
Yeah. So in music theory, a perfect fifth is the musical interval corresponding to a pair of pitches with a frequency ratio of 3:2, which you can see very easily right here. The term perfect, again, identifies the perfect fifth as belonging to the group of perfect intervals, like the perfect octave. There's one more perfect interval that we'll get to. So it's because of its simple pitch relationships and their high degree of consonance. It's because it has that ratio number of how these two notes are related it's so simple, like 2:1 and 3:2. That's a pretty simple thing, and you can see that the waveform, it cycles back in on itself. So there are periods where it is totally in line with itself. That's why it sounds strong.
Right. You'll be happy to know that Walther D20 says, "Oh, suddenly things make sense. I'm so rewatching this. Thank you, Brian."
Good,
So
good.
Just so you know, you're
That's
on the right path,
that's
and
the
people
goal.
are connecting with what you're explaining.
This is the building blocks of all of music and why it makes sense. As something I was trying to allude to in the first one, that part of the reason why we have power chords and why rock and roll music is so sturdy is because it's so acoustically sound, because the building blocks of it is a lot of fifths
Stability.
and octaves and a lot of perfect octaves, a lot of perfect fifths, a lot of perfect intervals. And so it is acoustically sound, basically. The sound not meaning like good together, not just sound. Good. All right. So like I said, the helpful way to recognize the perfect fifth is to hum the start of Twinkle Twinkle, and the pitch of the first twinkle is the root note, and the pitch of the second twinkle is the perfect fifth above it. Now, if you'll remember, I played an audio example in the first one of the how rhythm becomes pitch, and I played clicks where it was 2 times faster in one ear and than the other, and that was the sound of an octave. And at first you just heard clicks, and eventually pitch started to emerge.
Yes.
And then it kept rising, and you could clearly hear octaves rising and falling. We're going to do the same thing, except we're going to do it with the perfect fifth. And what's amazing about it is that rhythm of 3:2 is kind of a famous rhythm within music that exists, like 2 3 1 2 3 1 2. And when I do that, I'm basically playing a super low perfect fifth that we can't actually hear the pitch of.
Wow.
We're just hearing
So for a brief period of time, I was taking drum lessons, and something I'd like to get back to.
Yeah.
But that, I can do that, and I've just never even considered that.
Yeah.
That's a rhythm. That's not a pitch to me.
Carol of the Bells, Christmas Eve series of 1224. Because 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. Cool. So let's listen to that audio example since Dan was singing.
I'd say, hey, happy
here,
to do that.
Here it comes. So it's going to be in both ears. I'll be quiet
Yeah.
so you can hear it. So it's a rhythm right now. It's getting faster. Eventually you'll hear a fifth. Right about here, you can hear it. And you can hear, yeah, I know it sounds like your computer's going to explode. I promise it isn't
your
going to.
pets are probably going crazy if you're listening on speakers.
Yeah, if you want to roll that audio down for a second, you can. But if we're stuck with it, we're stuck with it. But you can hear the perfect fifth emerge out of rhythm.
And even as the pitch goes up, that's because the speed is going up, but that interval is staying the same.
Yeah, that ratio of 3:2 is happening in your ears. One is going at a rate of 3:2, the other one's going at a rate of 2:3, if that makes sense. But
yes,
you're getting 3 clicks for every 2 clicks in one.
Right.
So let's hear it when it gets. Listen for it when it gets very, very slow.
You can start to perceive it there.
Yeah, now you can hear rhythm.
That's very cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So I really love that idea of rhythm actually just being a very, very slow form of pitch. And that's part of why we're attracted to that 3/2 rhythm and why that emerges so much in music. It's because that is a form of harmony, that rhythmic interplay, hemiola or whatever you want to call it.
Interesting.
So anyway, so that's the perfect fifth, and that's a good example of it. And it is, outside after the octave, after unison and octave. This is like the next building block of music, and so a lot of music comes back to the sound of, if I can get my synth back here, the sound of, let's see. A lot of music resolves around
that relationship between the root and the fifth.
Yeah, I mean, you could think about Blitzkrieg Bob.
Right, there's a third in the middle.
That's the scale degree 4, which we'll talk about.
Oh.
But everything, but if you took the fourth out of it, it's just really about going 1, 5, 1. It's really about that coming back and forth between 1, 5, 1. And that is, a lot of music can just be broken down to that simple, fundamental form of tension and release. Music is all about tension and release. Let's take a look at the next interval, because I know we're kind of going over on time a little bit. So we are, again, looking at the whole harmonic series. We looked at the octave, we looked at the perfect fifth, and so this was 330 hertz, and this is 440 hertz. So we have another A. So we have A, E, A. Well, let's take a look at this interval relationship right here. So that is the E below an A. So before we had A going up to E, which was a fifth. When E goes up to A, that's a fourth. That is a perfect fourth. Let's hit the next slide. So starting on the E, and that's the Here Comes the Bride. So these waveforms is another perfect interval. It's the ratio of 3 to 4 or 4 to 3, however you want to look at it. So that cycle is pretty closely related, even though it's starting to look a little bit like a French braid. It does have these nodes that line up really succinctly, and so this is the perfect fourth. So that is kind of an explanation for that other chord in even though that's a D, and we'll talk about it's the perfect fourth up from the root. So it's 1, 4, 5, 1. Yeah. So there we have, for the building blocks, we have unison, then the octave, then we have the fifth, and then we have basically the inverse of the fifth, which is the fourth, because we're going back from A to E, back up to A. So the perfect fourth is the next building block, and this, and again, this is a very, very low ratio of correlation, and I'm making a big deal out of it because a lot of other ratios get a lot more complicated, and that's where dissonance gets introduced. Like with the more complex of a ratio, these cycles don't meet up, but for very large distances.
Right.
Okay, so that's the perfect fourth. Let's move on. All right. So what do we have? So that was the third and fourth. Now we have the fourth to fifth.
Right.
So this is 440 and this is 550. So this was an A and this is a C sharp. Do you happen to know what that interval is when they're played together? So from A to C sharp. That's what those two notes are.
Third?
It's yes, it is a major third.
Okay.
All right. Let's hit the next slide, please. When you put them together, yeah, that's the major third. So that's at a cycle of 4 to 5. Now this is imperfect consonances.
I was going to ask, why isn't it called a perfect third?
Yeah, because it's not because the relationship between these two notes is starting to get a little bit more complicated. Yes, they're related, but they don't have as that. It's not as consonant as this or that. Now we've introduced a little more closeness.
Bit of tension.
Yeah, because look at how much tension that's creating over the waveform, over the cycle, the cycle. Yes, they match up, but they're through the middle. It creates more complexity, and we're just talking about relationships between two notes. When you add 3, 4, it gets really crazy. So that's the major third, and that is based on the I believe that's a ratio of 4 to 5. Let's keep going.
Okay.
So the relationship between 5 and 6. So if this is 550 and this is 660, that means this is a C sharp and this is another E. Remember, we had an E before back up here. We had A, E, A, C sharp, E. So C sharp and E. Okay.
Still pretty pleasant.
Still pretty pleasant, especially in the context of everything that we've been listening to based on that low fundamental here. Sorry. So we have this C sharp and E. Does that sound like another third to you?
It kind of does, but I didn't want to say that because I already gave that answer.
Yeah, but this time it's a minor third. So
okay.
So next slide. Yeah. So we can see that these two, they line up because they are a part of the same harmonic series, but it is a minor third. So emerging from just this one pitch A and all the different modes of vibration of that low A, you have the octave, the perfect fifth, the perfect fourth, a major third, and then a minor third. So all these intervals are starting to get smaller and smaller and smaller as the further up you go. And yeah, let's take a look at some other ways in which these might interact.
All right, so you've got a third and a sixth.
So this is an E, and this is a C sharp. So because let's say that this is, so we had A110, A220, this is E330, and then we have A440, and C sharp is 550. Okay, so when you have an E and a C sharp.
Oh, so that's the 5. Okay.
It's the first two notes of NBC.
I was going to say it sounds like a jingle.
The reason it's those pitches, by the way, is because it was owned by the General Electric Company, which is GEC.
Well, I had no idea.
That's why they did that on the old xylophone or bell kit.
Wow.
Or whatever. So that interval, going back into the key of A. So it still sounds nice together.
It does, yeah.
This is another imperfect consonance. It does sound good. It's together. But this is actually a major sixth. So by looking at this ratio of 3 to 5, if you guys will hit the next slide, you'll see what these two waveforms look like together. And while it doesn't it's interesting because it has part of the reason that it is so consonant, and while it's an imperfect consonance, is that it actually has this antinode that matches right in the middle. So by the time it cycles back over, you have the matching nodes, and you also have an interval in the middle where it lines up with another antinode. So that's part of why these two notes sound really nice together. All right, that's a major sixth.
All right.
And that's all embedded just within, we're talking about the first 6 notes of the harmonic series. Let's keep going.
Wait, there's more?
What?
Oh my God.
Yeah, all right. So let's talk about this.
Let's explain this if we can.
It's gonna be a long time. So this is all of the ratios all of the time. So I'm actually having a little bit of trouble reading these intervals. I believe this is the perfect fifth, right? And that's the perfect fourth? Yeah. Okay. So you can see these ratios that I was talking about here. The perfect fifth ratio is the ratio of 3 to 2, correct? And the perfect fourth ratio is the ratio of 4 to 5. So what this chart is saying is if you divide an octave into 12 equal sections, which is this line here, I believe. Yeah, you will see that if they're actually equal, it doesn't exactly line up with the mathematical ratios. It does very well for the perfect fifth
in certain areas,
and for the perfect fourth. And because of those building blocks being strong where they are, we actually, when you're playing a keyboard or even a guitar, the major thirds that you're playing are actually slightly out of tune with what occurs in nature, which is really fascinating. So we're all the time listening to music that's a little bit off. So when you're tuning a chord in a chorus, they always ask that the major third tune to the natural harmonics if it's held for a long time, rather than just oh, I'm defiantly on this pitch. Tune to the chord, tune to natural acoustics. This is probably going a lot deeper than I want to go, but this keeps this system of ratios keeps going, And so a lot of modern harmony was built on the ratio, like building blocks around the perfect fourth, the unison, the octave, the perfect fourth, perfect fifth, and all of those nice intervals that happened in between them. And there was a lot of experimentation about like how best to tune instruments, and things got really, really weird with keyboards for like a while until they. I wish I knew the exact year, but what we use now in modern Western music, when you sit down at a keyboard, when you're playing a guitar, this is the equal temperament system, where all 12 notes are equally spaced, despite the fact that they don't match up precisely to those imperfect consonances.
But at least it's a standard.
But at least it's a standard, and all things are basically equal. And so that way the whole instrument sounds good no matter where you're playing it. And you don't have... The instrument basically never sounds completely out of tune. If it was... So anyway, we could do a whole discussion on that, but it just gets really technical and really mathematical. But just know that if you base things only on the mathematical acoustic ratios... if you're trying to tune based on those, it actually won't line up with what your tuner tells you, because even the perfect fourth and perfect fifth are slightly off, slightly off. So that's part of the reason why tuners can be a little finicky.
A little finicky.
Yeah. So that is about all I had planned to get into today. That well does go a lot deeper as far as interval relationships go, but I wanted to talk about how they occur in nature first.
Sure.
Before talking about like why the 1-4-5 chord, why is 6 minor, all this stuff.
Right.
Let's talk about keep talking about the building blocks and these ratios and how intervals emerge from that series.
Okay.
Cool.
I do have one question from the audience, and this may actually be something that's better suited for Pody and Travis, just because I think they have a little bit more guitar construction experience than you or I do. But Beatmaster80 just asked, is that where the fanned fret comes into place? Many guitars have just straight frets all the way down. That's been the standard. But more recently, you've seen frets go like this, which changes those intervals on each string, theoretically so that it's a little bit more comfortable to play, or that it's more accurate.
I believe Pody's going to field this question.
Okay.
No.
Now that's
no, you're not going to field it, or no, that's not the right answer.
No, that's not the right. That's not the reason they're fanned.
No,
okay.
I was just saying no, just generally.
Well, yeah, I know that's your nature. Do you have any insight though?
I do. So you hear a little bit about intonation and whatnot with fan frets, but the biggest reason is usually you're seeing fan frets on extended range instruments. So, guitars with a low B or
7 or 8 string guitars.
Exactly. So the scale length is actually longer on those low strings, and then it's a more, normal length, 25.5 inches or whatever on the high strings.
I see.
So the fan frets are just there to get you more tension on those low strings, because it's really hard to get a B to sound good on a 25-inch scale instrument.
All right.
You know,
and that's it.
to do it through some pickup trickery and
sure,
whatnot,
but it's a
that
concession.
tension helps.
It's a concession to comfort and tonality more than it is about that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that has more to do, with physical constraints of the instrument and actually balance of tension, or however we talked about, like the tension, different tension between like a nylon instrument and. I'm sorry, I laugh every time I see the green screen. It's very funny to me.
It's fine.
I shouldn't point out our flaws, but failure is our best teacher, right?
I guess so. Then I'm very, very well educated.
Well, that's all I really had planned to talk about.
That's plenty, and thank you, because it was clear and it was a lot, and I'm sure that people have more questions, and we have a way to answer those. We do have the Rocksmith.com forums. We would love to hear follow-ups to this. If you have things that, I don't know if you're interested in doing a part 3. It sounds like there's still more information that you could go over.
The well goes very deep, and I do want to point out, can I get the synth sound back? Because we talked about consonants. There we go. All of those sounds are occurring within that low A, right? And they all stack up.
And they sound very pleasant.
Sound very pleasant. And we talked about very close, very simple ratios. A complicated ratio would be like a minor second or a minor ninth. And so that's... and you can literally hear the beating between those two notes.
Yes, as they compete.
As they compete.
Yeah.
And so and you can hear it get less dissonant as you go up.
There's somebody behind me with a knife.
That's a little unstable, but that's very consonant. So, so we can actually get into dissonance a lot later, although dissonance doesn't really play a big part of rock music, but it does. But it will.
Genres.
But in some genres, it will. And sometimes it's about like a kind of a beautiful dissonance, like that kind of a thing. This is on a synth sound, so it doesn't sound like guitar, but Foo Fighters kind of thing.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
That's kind of what I was going for.
They're a big tension and release.
Yeah, so music is all about tension and release. Music is nothing without silence, but that's kind of the main crux of it, is that music does want to resolve. So anytime you introduce something like that, be nice to your audience and let it resolve, and don't do things like this. Yeah.
Where is it? Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Excellent. Thank you very much. If you have more things that you'd like to know, or if you have some suggestions, because you took some of the suggestions from the feedback that we got on the first stream on this topic to build some of the topics that we talked about here.
Yeah.
If you have ideas, yes, by all means, go to the Rocksmith.com forums. We'd like to hear from you. If you have other just general unrelated things that you would like to see us cover on Rocksmith Encore, the world is our oyster, and we are limited only by what we feel competent talking about. But we have a lot of people here who are competent in a lot of different areas. So if you have ideas for future encores, we're open. We have a few ideas in the hopper, but you know what? We can schedule whatever it is that you would like more than what we feel like doing.
Yeah.
And thank you for putting this together.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I had fun.
We have to do this though.
No, stop.
You're not going to play Heart and Soul with me?
No.
You son
I
of
don't
a...
know.
Hey, everybody.
I don't know if it's public domain or not.
What about Chopstick?
I don't know. Let's just move on. Let's just move past it. He cut this.
Cody cut me off.
Yeah.
Thank you very much to Black Widow for being our moderator. Hopefully, some of you folks got some freebies. If you're looking for more freebies, obviously, come on back on Thursday. We will be doing another stream here on Twitch, on this Twitch channel, with a different focus. This week's DLC for Rocksmith is the 70s Mix 3. We've already revealed that that's Jethro Tull's Aqualung, Grand Funk Railroad's We're an American Band, and Golden Earrings Radar Love. So we're going to play all three of those, plus a bonus song. On Thursday's show, we'll have the folks that did the note tracks for those songs come on, talk a little bit about how they built that track. If you have any questions about how to play those songs better, it's a perfect time to ask. And I think that's pretty much it. Again, we have a series of these Rocksmith Encores on our Twitch stream, on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/RocksmithGame. You can watch all of them. There's a big-ass playlist where we go in chronological order. You can also jump around, of course, but if you'd like to learn everything from how to learn how to build a guitar or rebuild your guitar, Pody did a three-show segment on that. Plus, like I said, we had the anatomy of metal. We have sort of an introduction to guitar effects. If you're not sure what the difference is between chorus, flanger, phaser, and all these different kinds of fuzz versus distortion versus overdrive, that's okay. Those are normal questions to have, especially if you're just starting out with guitar. And our friend Brendan West, who was in the chat room before calling out stuff. He called himself a bog person at some point. I'm not sure why.
I know what that is.
But in any case, we have more of this sort of off-the-cuff, glad you asked, let's just explain what we know to you kind of information in our Twitch channel. So hopefully we'll see you back again on Thursday. Thanks so much for showing up. If you have follow-ups, go ahead and hit it on Twitter. We're twitter.com/RocksmithGame. We're on Facebook as /Rocksmith. And, of course, Rocksmith.com has its own dedicated forums with... I swear to God, they're friendly people. Our forums are not the kind of forums that you think about when you think about the evil, nasty internet. We have nice people, and they will help you if you ask politely. You'll find that there's some very good conversations, including space to go into deeper stuff like this stuff. So I'm Dan Emmerich. I've been your community developer. And
I'm Brian McCune.
And I'm your willing student, and thank you again.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
We'll
see fun.
See everybody in 72 hours back here on Thursday. Bye, everybody.